friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 4 of my 2023 Valentine Card Series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Carried Away and Flying High. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm starting with my dog, and for him I'm going to use E50, E51, and E53 for the majority of his body. I'm starting with that E53 and laying in some shadows down his back and blending that out with the E51. I'm actually going to do him in a two-toned look, so I skipped over his ears and tail and the little patch around his eye. Then I'm going to blend out the E51 with the E50 for the highlight, bring that up on his belly and down to the edges of his feet, and then I am going to jump right in with a second layer, just going right over where I had those colors laid out and just adding that little bit extra depth and saturation to him. It also just smooths out your blend, and it's something that I almost always do. So then I'm going to move on to my little fox, and I want to do the lower part of his face to be white. So I'm just using the E51 for the darkest and blending out with the E50 and then leaving some white cardstock there for the highlight. Then I'm going to darken things up with the E55, E57, and E59, and that's what I'm going to use for the dog's ears and the patch around his eye and his tail. So I started with the E59 and then blended that out with the E57. Trying to keep that color to a minimum because these are super dark shades. I don't want them to take over, especially the patch around his eye. I don't want that to get too dark so you can't see it. So I'm going to come in with that E55 and really go over the edge of that E57 and get that to soften up a bit and take that around his eye as well. And then again, I'm going to jump in with a second layer just to smooth everything out. I'm skipping over the E59 on the second layer though because I didn't want it to get too dark. So I just went in with the E57 and then blended out with the E55. And then the puppy is done. So I'm going to move over to the fox again. And for the rest of his body, I'm using YR12, YR14, and YR18. So I'm starting with the YR18 for the shadows. I'm going to flip his shadows because he's facing over toward the left, so his shadows are going to fall down his back on the right hand side. And then I'll blend out with the YR14, and I'll use the YR12 as the highlight. So when I was picking out these images for a Valentine card, I wanted to use the images that had heart-shaped balloons because the other critters have different shapes. There's either circles or stars. So I just wanted to keep it to the hearts so it would be in that Valentine theme. And it just happened to be a dog and a fox. And that reminded me of a movie from my childhood, a Disney movie called The Fox and the Hound. It's a really old one. I don't know if everybody remembers that one. I must have seen that movie so many times as a kid, and I loved it, but it also made me really sad in a way. I don't know, but I definitely watched it over and over, and I got a little bit too high up on his neck with that YR12, so I used my colorless blender to just push that back below his face, and that way I could keep the lower part of his face white. And I did forget to color in his other hand there. I'm going to go back and do that on my second layer. So when I did my second layer on him, I accidentally mixed up my markers because the YR14 has a darker cap. So I just automatically grabbed for the darkest capped marker. And so I did my first layer with the YR14. So I had to go back and add the YR18 and then re-blend that out with the YR14 and then use that YR12 again. And then I remembered to color in his hand. And then while I have those markers out, I'm going to use that YR12 for the birds' beaks. I decided to make them doves because doves are kind of the symbol of love, so it kind of still goes with that Valentine theme. So I'm using W00, E70, and E71. This has been my favorite combo for mice for a while now, but I thought it would be really pretty on these doves as well because the E70s are like a really beautiful grayish shade. They're like a little bit of gray and a little bit of brown mixed together and almost like a little pink underhue. So adding those in and then blending them out with the E70, I think just makes a beautiful shade for critters. So I wish the E70s had one shade lighter, but the E70 is the lightest one, obviously, since it ends in 0. So there isn't anything lighter to blend them with, but that's why I jumped to the W00 because it's warm as well, so it kind of blends in with them. Sometimes I do have to work at it just a little bit. Like here, I will go back in with a second layer of just the E70 and then blend that out with the W00. Just so they don't get too dark either. So just the mid-tone and the lightest shade, and that really does smooth out that blend much better. So again, I just shaded them in the direction they were facing, just like everybody else. And then everybody needs some rosy cheeks, so I'm using R11 and R20 for that to begin, although I am going to bring in a third shade. If the critters end up being dark enough, I often don't need the third shade, but these guys were all fairly light, so the cheeks were standing out just a bit too much for me. So I'm going to grab that R000 and just kind of trace around the edges of the cheeks, and it really just softens it into their fur tone or feather tone for the birds. So then I'm going back to that R11 because I forgot I wanted to add a little bit of extra color into the fox's ears. And then I'm moving on to some reds. I got to do some red heart balloons. So I'm using R24, R29, and R39. This has become my favorite red combo. I really love how that E39 adds so much richness to this combo, and then the R29 is like the absolute perfect red shade in my opinion, and then the R24 adds just a bit of brightness and warmth because it has almost like a salmony color to it, and it just, the whole combo together I think is stunning. So it's definitely become my favorite red combo. And again, I shaded the balloons the way that I shaded the critters that are hanging on to them. So for the dog, I added the heaviest shading on the left-hand side, and for the fox, I'm adding the heaviest shading on the right-hand side. So I'm just going to fill in those two balloons. And sometimes I like to leave a little rim light on the outer edge of the balloon, but with the heart shape, it was a little bit trickier to do, so I just decided to put the shadow right up on the edge. And then I am going in with a second layer of that as well. I just wanted to really deepen those shadows on the outer edges. And I colored the little tied up piece at the bottom just with the R39 because that wouldn't be getting any light coming through it. So I didn't think it needed to have, you know, a highlight or anything like that. So I just colored it dark. So adding in that last little bit of that R24, and then I'm going to grab my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and get that going off to the side. And I'll go over the eyes of all of my critters. It's especially going to help on that dog. It really makes his eye much more visible against that darker brown patch. And I did it on the doves as well. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock, and this is one that I had actually made a mistake on the back side, but this cardstock is so thick that I just decided to flip it over and use it for today's card. No need to waste it. Nobody will ever know except you guys. So I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks, and I'm starting at the top with tumbled glass. I want to do an ombre effect, and I want it to be light at the top and then darkest at the bottom. So I'm going to add that tumbled glass to the top, and that tumbled glass is so pale that I really did have to keep applying it over and over until I built up the layer that I wanted. I wanted it to be really visible, and the next shade that I'm using, Stormy Sky, doesn't blend great with it. You need to do a little bit of work to get them to blend together. So I wanted to make sure that there was enough ink on there to get these guys to kind of play nice together. So I will have to go back and forth and keep working at that, but I really love the end effect, so it's worth the extra effort. So I'm going back to that tumbled glass ink blending tool, adding some more ink there between the two and trying to soften the blend. I'm going to keep working at that. I'm going back to now the Stormy Sky, adding a bit more of that, just back and forth until I'm really happy with how they look together. And then for the bottom, I wanted to darken that up even further, so I'm going to bring in some chipped sapphire. So I'm going to add that all across the bottom. I basically split them up into thirds. I did bring the Stormy Sky up a little bit higher than a third and a little bit lower than a third, but they're going to end up getting overlapped in that center section between each of the thirds. So it ends up being about the same, maybe not perfect, but about the same for each of the three shades. So once again, just going back and forth until everything is as smooth as I want it to be, and just trying to make it, you know, as seamless as possible. But I also am going to do some distressing over top with some splatter detail. So if the blend isn't perfect, it's fine. So I'm going to start with some clean water, and I'm just spritzing that onto an acrylic block and picking it up with a paintbrush so I can get finer splatters. I accidentally got a little blob off to the side, and that's how you get like the larger ones if it drips off the block or off your fingers or something, and I prefer the smaller ones. So I blotted that up with a paper towel right away, and then did the rest of my splatters and then blotted those up as well. So that just lifts some of that ink up, so you get that little bit of a ghosting effect. And then I'm going to add some of the ink shades onto there as well. So I'm starting with the lighter two. There wasn't room to squeeze all three on there, but starting with the tumbled glass. I love how the lighter shades look on the darker inked parts, so I always like to use a variety. And then I'm using the Stormy Sky all over, and then I'll grab a baby wipe and just clean off the block really quick, and then do the same with the chipped sapphire. And just mix that up again with some water and then splatter all over the side. If you get closer to the cardstock with your paintbrush, you'll get larger droplets. Farther away, you get smaller ones. So I like to do a mix and then set that off to the side to dry. Then I'm taking the Hello Bluebird Partly Cloudy die. I'm going to die cut that out of some white cardstock and also some vellum. Normally I would use like a full sheet of vellum, but I had these two scraps that I wanted to use up. So because they were like different clouds, it didn't matter. So then I'm going to take my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue and run that all along the outside edges of this frame. I love this glue because it has that super fine nozzle, so it can get into this very delicate die cut. And then I'm just going to run that around some of the clouds. I'm not going to do it everywhere, but just a few key points, making sure that each cloud has a little bit of glue on it in a few places, so that will lay flat when I add it to the card. So I'm going to add that over the front of my ink blended panel. And even that, just like it is super cute, but I wanted to add some extra clouds. And I'm going to be working a bit different than usual today. Normally I add my images at the very end, but because I'm working with vellum, I need to know exactly where my critters are going so that I can hide my glue behind them. So I'm kind of just figuring out which clouds I want to be white, which ones I'm going to add the vellum to, and then which ones I'm going to leave just the outer frame. So I'm going to pop the white ones in. I figured those out first, kind of after that initial vellum one that I knew was going behind the fox and the hound in the center of the card. But other than that, I'm going to pop in the white ones first because I want to make sure that they were spread far apart from each other, kind of in like a little visual triangle. And then once I have those in place, I'm going to go back to the vellum ones and just make sure that I have the glue where the critters are going to cover it up. So I'm adding a little bit of glue, pressing that into place, trying to rub over it with my finger so it'll be as least visible as possible if any of it were to show. And then this one cloud that's going behind the fox, because it was on that second panel, like a little bit of the top of the cloud didn't die cut, but it's fine because the fox is going to completely cover that spot up. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that one into place. And now I know where I can add a little touch of glue to keep the top one down because the fox's balloon will cover that up. So you see I'm just kind of like figuring it out based on where my images are going to fall. I'm going to add another vellum cloud up to the top where the dog's balloon will cover the glue. And then I'm going to go ahead and commit to these images and adhere those down. So just making sure that I place it just where I had it, so all of that glue is covered up, and just holding them down in place for a couple of seconds so that that glue has time to adhere to that vellum because it is a little bit of a slippery surface. The glue does dry super fast though, so it doesn't take long at all. Just a few seconds to hold it in place. So then I'm going to start figuring out where I want the birds to go. I really wanted to get at least one more vellum cloud on there, or pretty much just one more. So I needed to figure out where my birds were going to go so that I knew that some of the glue would be covered up. So one of these birds comes with the Carried Away stamp set, and then the other three are from Flying High. And the two that are kind of like have their wings spread to the side, they look similar, but the one towards the right hand side has like 4 little ruffles on his feathers, and then the other one down below has 3. So the one with the 4 is from Carried Away, and no, I'm sorry, the one with the 3 is from Carried Away, and the one with the 4 is from Flying High. But anyway, just going and adding in my birds now that I've figured out where I want them, and then I'm going to pop in one more vellum cloud down at the bottom where that last little bird will cover it up. I'm also adding like little tiny dabs of glue where I can, and because I did that splatter detail, you really don't see the glue as much as you would on like a perfectly blended panel if you'd only use a tiny bit, because that splatter detail comes through and it kind of just looks like part of the background. But anyway, I'm going to add that last bird over that spot of glue and then pop this whole panel into my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment. I'm using You Lift Me Up from Carried Away. And I didn't quite get that inked up right on the end of You and the beginning of Lift. So I stamped that down a second time and just pressed a little bit firmer in that spot. And then I'm going to pop a card base in my MISTI. I'm using MFT's Snow Cone cardstock and then Lawn Fawn's Forget Me Not ink. And I'm going to take another image from Carried Away and the bird. And then the sentiment is from Flying High. So it just says, "Together we can soar." And now I'm ready to adhere this panel to my card front. So I'm just going to glue that down so that it lines up perfectly with the edges. Make sure that's on there straight, and then press that down. And I should have been a little bit more careful because when I pressed that down, my fingers kind of touched the word up and transferred a little bit of ink below it. It's hard to see on camera, I think, but in person it was much more visible. But I'm going to fix that in a little bit. But now I wanted to add some of these little heart sequins or heart confetti from Studio Katia. So I'm just adding tiny dabs of glue with my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, and then picking those up with my Studio Katia embellishment wand and setting them into place. And if I don't set them down straight up and down, I just use the back of the wand to fix it before that glue dries. So really quick and easy to do, and it's a subtle embellishment that really adds a lot of pop when you tip it. So I will show that to you later on. But I'm just going to continue adding some of these little hearts here and there, just sprinkled throughout the scene until it's nice and full. And I'll tip that a little bit so you can see that shimmer. But I'm going to put all of those little hearts back in there using my Twiddler's Nook embellishment tray. And then I'm going to add a little bit more shimmer using some Stardust Stickles. I'm just going to add it to the 2 heart balloons. So not going crazy because we already have a lot of shimmer with the heart confetti. But I can't make a card without stickles. It's so hard for me. Very rarely I will do it if it's a more masculine card, but I don't know. For the holidays, you know, any kind of holiday, it seems like glitter is appropriate. So just adding that to the outline of the hearts where the deepest shadows are. And there you can see all of that shimmer and shine as I pick that up. And I'll give you another peek at the inside. So that completes today's card. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. You can leave me a comment down below and make sure that you ring the notification bell so you're always alerted when I post a new video, which is every Monday and Friday. All of the products used will be listed down below in the description bar. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 4 of the previous 2 years of Holiday Card Series. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.